Hi everyone! We are back at it again with another video. I'm in the most glorious Halloween sweater. I'm going to show you the back because it's super funny. Look at that! It's so good. But at any rate, I was going to post the video going through my thrifted and vintage Halloween collection this week, and then I ended up really dragging my feet on editing that video and felt really inspired to edit the video that you're going to be watching right now, which is a Halloween themed paint with me, where I kind of describe my process painting one of the little resin pieces that I'll repaint that is from like a big box store. So we're gonna get into that in a second, but I just wanted to stop in and say hello and thank you for watching. If you're interested in these, I really appreciate it. Also, although almost nobody watched my putting up Halloween lights videos, which I completely understand because that's kind of a lot to watch, someone just putting up lights and being kind of an idiot. One person did watch enough to get to the part where I was talking about naming the skeleton and was sweet enough to leave a comment saying that it should be named Bonaparte, which I think is hilarious and a great choice, so I'm gonna flash that person's username on screen. Excuse me. And I so appreciate that, and I appreciate the people who commented on my Joanna Parker video. You guys are so nice, and I'm glad that there's at least a handful of people who are enjoying these as much as I'm having fun making them. So, without further ado, we're gonna get into this Halloween paint with me. Thanks! Alright, let's take a look at the guy who we're going to be repainting today. This is a little ghosty and a pumpkin that I got from a TJMaxx, and while I think it's super cute, I'm not a big fan of the paint job on this one. I think it's a little bit messily done. You can see that the bottom just is not looking too good. I'm also not a big fan of the purple ruff. And I think that we could do a little bit better with the colors as well as just the cleanness of the paint. You can see along the edge between the ruff and the ghosty's face is just not super cleanly done. And I'm not a big fan of the texture that they have on the pumpkin. So again, it's a super cute piece, but the face could be cleaner. Most of it could be cleaner, so let's get started. So the first step we're going to do is using gesso to give it a nice base, which if you don't know what gesso is, it is a surface prep that you can use for canvases or three-dimensional objects. You have to stir it up, for which I use my most out-of-shape brush because it hardens so quickly that I just have one that I don't care about that I use. And then I take my little container of cheap brushes to find the one that we're going to use to paint over our ghost. Now, as you can see, this is a super thick material. However, it doesn't come on fully opaque, so we'll need a few different layers of it on the object to make sure we get full coverage. And as you'll see, it doesn't need to be literally 100% opaque, but as long as it is light enough that the colors will go over it cleanly. And we are also going to be working with the texture by just using a paper towel to give it a nice even textured look, which the paint will sit on top of really nicely, but also kind of makes it feel a little bit more like a real vintage piece as opposed to just kind of a resin home good TJMaxx decor piece. And you can see that as we put the texture on, how much we will definitely need to have a second layer. But I find that at least doing a bit of texturing for each layer as opposed to just the top layer really helps the overall effect later on in the piece. So we'll keep on doing that. There's me getting the back of the pumpkin. And doing that texture. All right, now we're going into layer 2, which it's my first time filming one of these, so I wasn't always perfectly centered, but I tried to cut out the clips where that's the worst. But as you can see, I'm doing the layering. I had started to do the texture, but I needed to wait for it to dry a bit so that it wouldn't take off the first layer. So I'm just going to go in and fully paint over it before I actually continue on with the texturing. All right, so that is the gesso layers, which as you can see, there still is a lot visible. So what I do is we have a really nice base that paint will adhere to pretty evenly. So I go over it with actually some acrylic white paint to really make it as opaque as I can. So we'll still have the gesso medium for things to adhere to. Like as you can see, that acrylic white is adhering really well to that base. But the acrylic still will have a thicker coverage. And you can see I'm going in and actually texturing it with a paintbrush now, because we have enough coverage that we don't just need the paper towel. Okay, so now we're gonna get our paints ready, and as you can see, I have a super limited palette that I work with. I really like to focus mostly on mixing my own colors, so I just have the basics. I only really work with acrylics for these repaints as well, and just a couple other projects. Mostly I use oils. So for acrylics, I just kind of work with what I have. As you can see, I wanted to dull out the white of the ghost skin a bit, which this color ended up looking a little bit too much like human skin, and I didn't want the fact that it's a ghost to get lost, so you'll see how I work with that problem later on. But for now, I'm just giving it a base coat that makes it feel a little bit more aged, a little bit more vintage. And that was just used mixing a little bit of red and yellow with some white paint. And then I'm putting really bright white highlights on the wet paint, so the highlights and the underpaint mix together. But it gives him a bit of a paler look and makes it have a bit more of a ghost coloring. Now I'm going to move into doing my first layer on the hat, for which I've chosen this blue that sort of is like a Prussian or a phthalo blue. And for that, I'm mixing blue with just a bit of yellow and red to kind of dull it out, and some black to really deepen the color. You can see that makes just a beautiful dark blue that again has a bit more of an antiqued, aged feeling. And I'm trying to get the edges as clean as I can, because even though I can go and clean this up later, the cleaner you stay from the beginning, the easier a time you'll have later on in the process. So you can see I'm just trying to make sure, especially against portions that I know are going to be super light, to not get too messy. Because the lighter it is, if you get a stain on that, like you see I got that little bit of blue, the harder it's going to be to cover it up later, the more thick layers you'll need to make sure it's covered. So there we go, there's the first layer of the hat done. I'm mixing a little bit more of the color. And I skipped ahead because that was me painting the buttons and it got too off camera. But now I'm just painting in the whites of the eyes. And I'm just really gently putting those whites on with a fine brush. So for these, I slowed it down from the time lapse just so you can see that you have to go really slow. And it's pretty thick paint that I have on there, which is another reason you can see I got a little glob in the line between the whites and the iris. And you can see I'm just really trying to be as delicate as possible. And I'm adding some more highlights, which I also got a bit too thick paint on there. I'm adding some more highlights just to really make sure you can tell this is a ghosty, not just a very pale little person sticking their head out of a pumpkin. And I had to skip ahead again because of that framing issue, but what I'm doing is adding some shadow around the eye, which will help give it a bit more of a spooky feeling. What I do is I add the sort of darker shadow and then I add that mid-tone that the face had originally been painted to sort of brush it out and give it a pretty even gradation into the rest of the face. Go, and that takes a little bit of working to make sure it's even on both sides. You can see me going around and making sure that I have it exactly how I want it, and then going in and just reinforcing those highlights one more time. So as you can see, I also have started with the face, which I do because that's sort of the anchor point for the piece, and it's a pretty good entry point versus what we're gonna do, which just gets a little bit annoying, which you'd think the face would be the hardest, but for this piece, because of the shapes that we're working with, I found that this is the easiest way for me to kind of get into it. And then when I go in for the iris, or I guess the pupil, you can see I didn't do a straight black, but I took that sort of Prussian blue that we were working with and mixed it with just a bit more black, so it's not that super dark black that would kind of contrast a bit too much with the other colors we're gonna have, but a slightly bluish black that still stands out but isn't too stark a contrast against the rest of it. And that I'm also just really slowly going in, turning it every which way to make sure I get the right angle, which is the nice thing about working on smaller pieces. You can see I'm mixing up this pink, which is going to be for the mouth. And I wanted a sort of dull mauve kind of color because I didn't want it to contrast too much with the rest of the piece. You can see here again that I'm using one of my really tiny miniature brushes to go in and just very delicately make sure that it's filled in an opaque color. Now I'm going to go in with a little more shadow to give a bit more dimension around the mouth. And that's just really slow, tiny strokes. The nice thing about acrylic is that it's pretty easy to fix your mistakes, but again, if you don't make a mistake the first time, you'll save yourself some time later. So I'm just trying to do this super delicately. He's got these little tiny smile lines, so I'm just trying to bring those out a little bit and then give some highlight around just to really draw attention to that cute little ooh face that he's making. Lovely. So now, one thing I really liked in the original piece was that this ghostie had rosy cheeks and a rosy nose. So I'm going to come in and do that again, but I'm going to make sure that it is, again, this sort of dull mauve color that gets the antique ghost kind of feeling. And you'll see I had that pink, but I thought it was a bit too bright, so I'm just covering it up with a pretty translucent layer of white So you still get the pink, but just a little bit less intense. There we go. All right, and I'm adding a little pink to the nose too, and I'm going to do the same thing. I start with the pink color I chose and then do just some translucent white on top. So now I'm going to start doing the band around the hat. As you can see, I chose this really lovely sort of mustard color, which I thought contrasted with that blue super nicely. And the ruff is also going to be that same color. Because I thought in the original piece, I really would have liked, even though I wasn't a huge fan of that purple, it would have been nice if that purple had shown up somewhere else. So for my mustard, I wanted to make sure that that color was carried through. So you can see there's the first layer of the mustard. And now I'm going to do the first layer of the pumpkin, which as opposed to choosing a really bright orange, again, I'm going to do a bit of a duller orange that, you know, still is quite nice, but just isn't so bright and feels almost a little unrealistic. Not that this is the most realistic piece, but you know what I mean. Now what I'm doing is to add some more dimension to the hat. I'm just doing a really thin layer of black right around the edges and using a dry brush to sort of brush it out into the rest of the blue, which just gives a bit of dimension and contrast. And I'm going to do that around both sides of the hat band and also the tip of the hat. And those are the type of touches that not everyone kind of knows to do, but really can add a lot without making a ton of extra work for yourself. So that's something I would highly recommend if you want a bit more dimension, but you're not sure how to add it. Going in with a little bit of kind of a drop shadow and a dry brush can really do a lot to make a piece feel a bit more finished. All right, so there's the black that was added on. That's all done. And now I'm going to add just a little bit of light hitting the eye, which as you can see I have to do super slowly with my tiniest brush, which gives a little bit of character. I always recommend adding a little highlight in the eye if you want your characters to feel friendly and like they have emotions, like they're actually thinking something. And I did two little ones right there, and I'm just adding a little pure white highlights. So there's the face mostly done. I'm going in again with another layer on the buttons, which are the same Prussian blue, although they look a little black here. We're now on day 2. And I'm trying to do another layer on the pumpkin. Because as you can see, the pumpkin and the ruff are still rough. They need a lot of work. And they'll need a couple more layers each just to make sure we really get full coverage. And we really have those clean lines. And as you can see, that orange looks a little lighter. The one frustrating thing about working with acrylics, especially like the cheap acrylics that I use, is that everything dries darker. So when you're on day 2 and you're trying to recreate a color you had, you need to account for the fact that whatever color you mix is going to dry darker than what it looks like you have. This is also why I try and get a completely done layer, like first layer of something, before I move on to the second layer, so that even if the second layer is slightly different, I have full coverage already of one color, then I can just fully cover it with the other color that makes it come out a lot more even, as opposed to having tiny little bits here and there you need to paint and having to work super hard to color match it. I'm just trying to skip that whole noise. So trying to make sure that I have full coverage of every single layer of it that I do. There's me working on the ruff. The ruff honestly was the most annoying part of this whole thing, which I knew it would be, but anything that is an unusual shape like this that also has these tiny little holes that need to go in it, always super frustrating and annoying. And there is me touching up a little bit of the mustard that I got on the ghostie. And there I am going in and trying to fill in those little holes so that even though it's not an angle you're gonna see a lot of, that it still looks clean. So if someone were holding this and kind of checking it out really closely, it would still look relatively clean in that underside. And I'm also trying to clean up the line between the ruff and the face of the ghost, because that was something that I'd been super annoyed by with the original version, that line was really uneven. That's how it's looking so far. Looking pretty good. We're getting there. I think we're almost there. Now what I'm gonna do is add some detail onto the band on the hat that I thought would be really cute. And that shadowy kind of mustard color is not the actual detail. That's just to kind of have a guideline for me that's pretty easy to cover up should I change my mind, which as you can see I did a little bit. But this is to add just a little star and polka dot pattern that I thought added some extra interest to the piece, since there's not really a whole lot going on. It just kind of is what it is. So you can see I'm going in, and the way I paint stars is I just draw them the way that you were taught to draw them in grade school and fill them in. So the, point to point, which it's sort of hard to see in the video because I've chosen the same orange of the pumpkin, again trying to carry through these different colors. But you'll see how I make sure to give it some contrast so that you can really see that orange. I'd thought initially that that shadow that was sort of my marker would be enough, but it definitely is not. So instead I'm going to go in with my tiny brush and use a sort of grayish color to just give it a little outline. And then I'm going to use some more of the mustard to go around and clean up that outline and make sure it's not too thick. And I'll just keep doing that for the other stars. And you can see they're a little off center, which was intentional. I didn't want it to be perfect. I wanted it to feel, again, very folksy, very antique. And while antique stuff does have a lot of these little details, it's rare that you really find a lot of straight lines. So I wasn't trying too hard to make this seem like a perfectly printed pattern. I kind of wanted it to be different. Look at that tiny little brush. I don't have the steadiest hands, so I still have to get kind of into the zone while I'm doing this. But it's also why I have found that acrylics are really nice to work with, because they dry quickly and it's pretty easy to go back and fix your mistakes. Although I must say that outline came out pretty well. For something so tiny, I think I did an alright job. Got a little bit too into the center there, but fix that up real quick. So initially I had wanted the stars to go all the way around the band, and then I kind of changed my mind because I liked it as sort of just this front detail, and the way I'm going to be setting this up in my decoration, you're not even going to see the back, so I wasn't even going to worry about it. And I'm going in and adding onto the buttons. I wanted to add some actual button detail onto them. So this is me just adding those little details, adding a bit of shadow and highlight and making it seem a bit more like a three-dimensional actual button. There we go, there are little buttonholes. Very cute. Almost looks like a pig nose, which many buttons do. And then I wanted just a little bit more details on the band, so I decided to do just a few little polka dots. I thought that was super cute and just was that little extra touch that I needed. Which again, I didn't think the polka dots needed to be perfect, but I didn't want them to be super misshapen, so I did go back in with the mustard color and even a few of them out a little bit. Looking pretty good. I think we're almost there. We're so close. I'm very excited about how this is coming out, but I still need a bit more detail. So adding those final touches on the band, and then I'm going to need to start adding some detail onto the pumpkin. Oh, just a little bit more touch. And those fine details take a lot of time, so don't be frustrated if you have to go back and correct. That's just how it is, and that's why paint is so fun, because you can make those corrections. I'm gonna add just a bit of dimension onto the pumpkin. So first I'm giving it one more layer because it wasn't fully opaque, which was really bothering me. I'm just doing one more layer to make sure we really have full coverage of the pumpkin body. Oh, and there was me fixing up a little bit of a mark that I got on the edge of the hat. So then, what I decided to do, I didn't want to do a ton of highlights because I really like that pumpkin color, but instead of doing a highlight on the top of those pumpkin ridges, I'm going to add some shadow down in the grooves. And that's just a pretty light color, but it's enough that it'll add that extra dimension. And again, a lot of these things, you know, as with the black on the hat, a lot of stuff is just finding what are the little ways that you can just add a little bit more dimension, which really, really helps a piece feel more professionally done, feel more finished, and in this case, feel a little bit more antique because of the color palette I'm using and the object that I've chosen to do this repaint on. So you can see it's just kind of it's sort of a like dark ochre color. And if I make too thick a line, I just add a bit more of the pumpkin orange to sort of bring it back into the grooves. Oh, fixing one more thing on the hat. Because I had to hold the hat for a lot of this, I had to keep on going back and doing little touch-ups because I wouldn't realize I had a little bit of paint on my hands. So unfortunately, my camera is about to die as I'm doing these grooves. There she goes. But what's fun about that is that leaves a little bit for the reveal, which mostly what I did was just little touch-ups and things just to make sure it really felt like a finished piece by the time we get to what we're about to see. So, here is what it looked like before. Just for a reminder, you can see still extremely cute, but just needed a little bit of a finer paint job. So, drum roll please. And here is the final repaint. Yay! I am so happy with this. It was super fun to do. You know, not super crazy, but I just added a bit more dimension. I do think I could have done a little bit more on the orange, and you can see I got a tiny chip of paint onto that edge that I just took off. But overall, I'm really pleased. I really like the detail of the face, those little drop shadows around the eyes. It's not a drop shadow, it's just a shadow, but... and the detail on the hat. Thought it was super fun. And I'm just really happy with how it came out. You can see my monogram on the bottom. Again, I'm really pleased with it, and I think this is much more my style and definitely a piece that I will keep putting out. I would also say if you really want to seal your paint jobs, you should get a matte clear coat that you can get as a spray paint, but since this is just sitting on a shelf, I'll probably just leave her like this. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that so much. I am here with the special little guy who, because of my softbox light, is sort of difficult to see. But you saw it in the video with slightly better lighting. I know that there were some issues with that. It was my first time filming a sort of paint with me style video. So I know it wasn't perfect, but I hope you had fun and maybe learned something new if you have not done something like that before or are interested in getting into doing your own repaints or just working with paint mediums in general. I'm super happy with this guy. I still need to give them a clear coat just to seal it, but I love it. Anyways, thanks so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you soon. Bye!